Here's what I know. Hillary Clinton was an outstanding Secretary of State. She would never intentionally put America in any kind of jeopardy.
President Obama, in our exclusive interview, doubling down on his defense of Hillary Clinton in the private email scandal. And it's time now for our Sunday group, syndicated columnist George Will, and Gearan of the Washington Post, GOP strategist Karl Rove, and Bob Woodward, also from the Washington Post. Karl, I want to start with the president's comments about Hillary Clinton. I got to say, I was surprised that he even got into this, given the investigation, but he wanted to basically to defend her again against the allegation that she somehow jeopardized national security with her private emails, her private email server. And at the same time, he said this investigation by the FBI, the disposition by the Justice Department, will be made on legal grounds, not political. Do you see a contradiction there?
Yeah, I do. He should have stepped away from this and not commented on it, but he did. He was offering the first defense of Hillary Clinton. It was unintentional, and it really wasn't important information because, as you know, there's classified and then there's classified. It was really inappropriate, I think, for the chief executive of the United States to comment on an ongoing FBI investigation. Secondly, I don't feel particularly comforted by his follow-up, which was, of course, it's not going to be political because that's not how the Justice Department operates. Well, the American people have a great deal of concern about how this particular administration's Justice Department operates. After all, Lois Lerner is out there free and clear after clearly abusing her powers at the IRS. And this administration, as you recall, started off by dropping the investigation and charges that had been filed against the Black Panther Party, which was on videotape, harassing voters at the polls in Philadelphia in 2008, and it was all political. So the president may have wanted to sort of reassure the American people it'd be all done on the up and up, but this administration needs to understand and not starting from a position where people assume that that's what's going to happen.
Here's what Hillary Clinton had to say this week about the possibility that she'll end up being prosecuted.
That is not going to happen. There is not even the remotest chance that it's going to happen.
We asked you for questions for the panel, and we got a bunch of questions like this one from Michelle Sylvie, who writes on Facebook, "It's a pointless conversation since we all know the Justice Department, Attorney General Loretta Lynch, and Obama will continue to protect her as long as she continues to promote his agenda and refuses to criticize him." Bob, really two questions. How do you answer Michelle, and what do you think of the president weighing in on this case while the FBI is still investigating?
Well, it's a headline because he is anticipating the defense where he said it is unintentional to establish that there was a crime here. One of the elements is intent. And as best I can tell, no one's saying she intentionally put out this material. Also, President Obama said, look, this is carelessness. I understand that what they're going to be able to say is no crime because there was no intent. Yep, the system broke down. If you talk to people in the White House, State Department, Pentagon, they all send these classified messages around. It's the way of doing business. Their argument is, hey, I'm over in the Middle East, so I need to do this. So there's news here, and I think it's going to, this is what we're going to see. Oh, big mistake, carelessness, no intent.
But let me pick up on the fact that the president even discussed it. I remember when Richard Nixon was president, I think he weighed in on the Manson case, and he got blasted about speaking, and of course he didn't have any relationship to the Manson family. What do you think of the propriety of the president weighing in like this in the midst of an FBI investigation?
Well, it proves that we're in a political situation here now. Hillary Clinton is running for president. There have been lots of questions, I think serious, unanswered questions about the email here. But if you can establish there was no intent and there is carelessness
but you're kind of ducking my question. System. What about the president weighing in?
You know, look, he's a political figure, and that's up to him. Karl made the critique. I think, you know, always better in a case like this with a sensitive case. It's a hot stove. Don't touch it. He not only touched it, he put his arms around it.
George, your reaction to his comments?
Well, it was on Fox News Channel in the midst of what was supposed to be a Justice Department investigation of Lois Lerner and the IRS that the president said, prejudging the whole process, there's not a smidgen of evidence of a scandal at the IRS. Now, we know that the Justice Department investigation was a sham. It was part of the cover-up. They gave the investigation to an Obama contributor working in the Justice Department. But his whole approach to this is a train wreck of non sequiturs. First, he said, well, she didn't do anything wrong because she was a good Secretary of State. Then he said she didn't do anything intentionally wrong, whereas negligence, which is not intentionally doing something wrong, but doing something wrong anyway, is the heart of this. Then he went off on a tangent about overclassification. He said, well, some of these might have been open source documents rather that she could have got elsewhere, our enemies could have got elsewhere. Finally, then he says, I've got to be careful about this, which brings us back to the IRS and Lois Lane. He's selectively careful about his intervention in these.
And the president talked about a lot more than just Hillary Clinton. He also talked about his, and that was the reason for the interview, I think from the White House's point of view in the first place, his nomination of Merrick Garland to the Supreme Court. He talked about concerns about underreaction to terror attacks, and he talked about the anger in the American voting public, not only on the Trump side, but also on the Bernie Sanders side. Your thoughts about the interview in general?
Well, I mean, I think the Merrick Garland stuff is very interesting. He says definitively that he will not pull the nomination, even if Hillary Clinton is elected, and that will essentially tie her hands. I mean, if as we all presume, that this doesn't even begin to come up for consideration until a lame duck session of Congress, then that means that he would either be confirmed or voted down, before she takes office, as she takes office, sometime, early in her period, which takes away a potential Supreme Court nomination for her. She has also said that this is the president's choice, and she will not weigh in on it. She will not say that if elected, she would like to make her own. So I think they are both clearing the field here. I thought that part was very interesting. The terrorism stuff is very interesting. He gave a nuanced defense of essentially why he acts the way he does and says the things he does about the degree of threat to the American people. I thought it was a very interesting and newsy response.
Karl, I want to ask you just generally about the president. I didn't ask him about the Republican race because he likes to talk about that a lot on his own. I didn't think I needed to give up one of my questions on that, but he still took some veiled shots at Ted Cruz about carpet bombing, about Donald Trump, about banning all Muslims. And the question I have is, how potent can this president be in this election? You see him, I know the number is 50%, and once their approval ratings get up over 50%, they're seen as positive, and under 50%, they're seen as a drag. He's up over 50% in a lot of polls now. How potent a force do you think he can be in this election?
Well, he can be a potent force, but ironically enough, he can do so by withdrawing from the scene. Why is he at 50% today? It's because we are consumed with the Republican and Democratic contest for the presidency, and he has largely receded from view. The more he intrudes into this, the better it is for the Republicans, and his numbers will go back down. He has been largely invisible in the content. If you look at the amount of time that's being devoted to him, it's much less than it was 6 months ago or 9 months ago. So I welcome the president's attitude that he wants to be an active force in the presidential election, because the more he is there and more it reminds people that this is about a third term for him and makes it less likely that people will grant them. In the modern era, we've had 7 instances where the White House has been held by the same party for 8 years, and only 1 instance have they been able to win a third term. If he were politically smart,
George H.W. Bush after Reagan.
Right. If he were politically smart, he'd make certain that he has as low a profile as possible, not as big a profile, but I don't think he can help himself. He wants to opine about this in ways that I don't think are going to be constructive for the ultimate Democratic nominee.
Well, I mean, I think that conflates the primary with the general, right? Right now, Hillary Clinton wants him around. And to an extent, Bernie Sanders as well. I mean, she's trying to lash herself as closely as she can to the Obama legacy. That may change in the general election, but for Democratic primary, that's exactly where she wants to be. One wants him to be.
I thought one of the interesting things was his tone and his body language. He was very confident. He was quite happy. Going back to 2009, I talked to him about the terrorism, and he said, oh, we can absorb a terrorist attack. He doesn't use that language, but essentially what he said to you is, hey, look, yeah, could be a disaster. I'm trying to stop it, but it's not going to change the way we live.
Exactly.
We're
So
going
they
to
can
go to
kill us,
ball
but-
games,
Yeah, but
like George.
The tone is part of the problem. Chris, you referred to his diffident tone. I think it comes across as condescension. I mean, it's one thing to say as many people or more people die in bathtub accidents, but bathtubs aren't trying to kill us. There's a difference, and the American people feel this, between an individual accident and premeditated mass murder. And when he coolly says, if people only understood these numbers, they would calm down, it inevitably communicates condescension to the people. Now, this is a man who, after all, his own Secretary of Defense said rightly, in my judgment, that the biggest threats facing the country are Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, and then ISIS. That's fine, because ISIS isn't an existential threat. But then to go from that to bathtubs is reducing the American people to children.
All right, we have to take a break here.